Hello everyone, my name is Rehkop, CECOM Transformation Director, and I'm very excited to be here today to talk to you about CECOM and transformation. So as we look at transformation, I'm sure everybody is like, what does that mean? And I know we've all experienced transformation. If we would just take a look back in the last 20 to 30 years, think about what we've lived through. We had e-commerce. We used to use cash for everything, and then we transitioned to debit cards. And then we started having personal computers and went to laptops and buying things online. You can take a look at social media and just how much that's changed in the last 20 years. And now we're up to AI and incorporating that into our daily lives. And so when we look back at how we interact with people, and that's changed the way we live, how we shop, what we do, and where we do those things with people. And the Army is also at a very critical juncture right now in terms of transformation. And mainly that's because of the changing character of warfare. All those changes that I mentioned before and where the global environment is going puts us really in a new era of warfare. I want to read a quote from the Chief of Staff of the Army, General George, and he's talking about the future fight. He said, "The Army must not just prepare for one theater or conflict. The challenge is we must be ready to go anywhere and respond at any scale in defense of our nation. We must be prepared to fight in all theaters in any environment." And so that's what we're charged to do. How does the Army get after that? And so that's where we get into three frames that I want to lay out for you today. The first one is framing the environment, or why transformation. The problem frame, what our role is in transformation. And the third frame is the solution frame of how we put ourselves into a continuous transformation model to better support the Army. And so to get after that, the Army has put out this continuous transformation model. This came out last year with General George and Army Futures Commanding General Rainey. And they talked about this and really how we get after this changing character of warfare and our adversaries. If you remember, about 10 years ago, we were sitting in this very space, and you might have heard various generals or senior leaders talk about, hey, we have near-peer adversaries. And then 5 or 6 years ago, it was, hey, we have peer-to-peer adversaries. And now as we survey the global environment, our Army leaders are noticing that we are, in some capabilities and in some domains, we might actually be overmatched against those adversaries. And obviously, that is just unacceptable for an Army that his main goal is to fight and win our nation's wars. So the Army has taken a hard look of how we get after this. How do we adjust and change in a rapidly changing environment? So you look right there on the slide, and I know it might be hard to read, so I'm going to help you out a little bit. The definition of continuous transformation is the way the Army remains dominant against evolving and emerging threats in an era of rapid change and the character of war. And that's really going to be capitalizing on three areas. That second bullet you see down there is really key. And I want everybody to really try to wrap your head around what this means, because the Army's really thought through this, and words matter here. It says, commanders must execute continuous transformation by innovating with organizational change, injecting and experimenting with new material, and taking prudent risk to achieve Army objectives. And this is probably the most important part to remember there, and I didn't have it highlighted, but within available resources, meaning structure and budget. So if we don't get any more money today, and we don't get any more people, how do we transform ourselves to enable our warfighters to have overmatch against our adversaries in any domain, in any environment, and in any part of the world? 2 weeks ago, we had a CECOM Commanders Forum. And as part of that, there was a fireside chat. And we were privileged enough to have senior leaders from Army Futures Command and HQDA G6. And they really laid out where our senior leaders' headspace is at in the Army right now. And there were some really big key takeaways that I just want to kind of float out there to let you know where our Army senior leaders are and where they're thinking. They said things like, the Army of today is unaffordable. Army senior leaders are willing to take more risk than ever before. How do we reduce requirements on systems? How do we get data, more data, the right data, faster to our soldiers to enable them to fight and win? And they started talking about things that the Army needed the community to come forward with solutions. And that's really the underpinning of this continuous transformation model. And that's really no surprise to us here at CECOM. The major underpinning is the network. And that's been said before in the past, but really the Army is doing things right now to enable that, called Next Gen C2, Next Generation Command and Control. And that's a clean slate network that doesn't rely on legacy systems anymore. So what does that look like? It really means maybe we're not going to sustain things the way we are right now. Maybe we're going to put things out for 2 years and lease it. And soldiers will turn it in like we do our cell phones. A new version comes out, oh, I'm going to turn it in and get the newest one. What does that mean? They mention things like that. What if we go to hardware as a service? We've already talked about software as a service the last couple of years for those of you that are in that space. You've definitely heard that term before. So what do all these things mean, and how do we get after that? And how do we get in lockstep with where the Army is going so that we can adapt and transform? And so the Army has really laid that out for us. We heard from Army Futures Command and HQDA 6 about that. That graphic on the bottom of those 3 time horizons, and that first one is transformation and contact. And that's really where we are right now, a 2-year period of time or a window that started in FY24. So we're about halfway through that right now. And the Army during this time has experimented in giving new equipment, modernized equipment, or prototyped equipment down to the tactical edge in different environments. And we're watching and seeing how that's happening and what lessons learned we can glean from that. And the Army just released another XORD, Transformation and Contact 2.0, that identifies more experimental units and more experimental equipment. So that's where we are right now in that phase. And then we move into deliberate transformation. How do we see ourselves? And that phase is really where we're looking at the traditional 4 to 5 year Army budgeting window, or the POM cycle. How do we influence the pegs and the money and where it goes? And maybe how do we restructure ourselves in that time frame? And then finally moving to the concept-driven transformation, which is about over half of the timeline, is how do we combine the lessons learned in transforming in contact, and then what we've done in the PEG cycle with money during that deliberate transformation time window, and then how do we execute that across the entire Army in a new concept with new material, new equipment, and a new force structure. And so ultimately, as you see at the end there, is a new Army warfighting concept. My directorate really has been tasked with, in this frame, is that environment that I just painted to you. And now we're moving into the problem frame, the second frame, and how we see ourselves in that. And as the CG has mentioned before, that problem is right now. So CECOM is not currently postured to support the Army in a continuous transformation model. And that's hard to hear. And so I wanted to kind of lay out, this is how we see ourselves right now, of laying out those capabilities. So as you look at this slide, across the top are those AMC initiatives that the headquarters staff here at CECOM is getting after. You kind of look at the outer edge of that, and you see all of our subordinate commands and what their kind of key capability is that we can, as of right now, can provide to the Army. And then you get closer to the middle, and you see that revolving circle that has rearm, transformation and contact, C2 fix, which is kind of the previous version of the next gen C2, and how we adjust to MDO maintenance. Some of you are in those work groups. That effort's led by CASCOM, and that's influencing how the Army maintains and sustains equipment in multi-domain operations or large-scale combat operations. And then you see our CECOM logo in the middle. And as you look at that, right now our problem is we're not really in the middle. We're kind of on the outer edge, to be honest. And the Army is trying to figure out what we can provide. How do we influence those forums of putting ourselves in the middle to be a key cog of turning that wheel so that all of our capabilities within this command are infused into those Army initiatives and any other Army initiatives that's going on, so that the Army understands what we can provide. Because we know we're all experts in our field. and we have a lot to offer. We consider ourselves to be the experts, and what we can provide is very important and critical to the warfighter. So how do we do that? And so that's really the problem frame that my directorate is trying to get after. So what we're really trying to focus on right now is taking that holistic view of the command and looking at key windows or decisive points in time. Identifying what some of those core capabilities that we can take to influence up into these kind of up and out organizations as you see there. So Army Futures Command, TRADOC, FORCECOM, and obviously AMC. We've been involved in those forums, but how do we maybe re-energize ourselves in those forums or get into new spaces or forums that we haven't been in? How do we champion efforts that are already going on or things that we're already doing? And that's really kind of what you see as on the bottom half of the screen there is those buckets that we've heard from the commanders and directors of what they're kind of doing right now in transformation so that we can take what's those initiatives in those forums and make sure that the Army knows that CECOM is here and we're here to provide solutions. And so that's what my directorate has been charged with. We're getting involved in those forums, energizing and creating new relationships in some cases. And this really shows where we've made some real gains, and that's I want to start with the C2 CFT. Command and Control CFT is right here on this right here on our campus. And so this is what the Army is calling a clean slate network, Next Gen C2, not relying on any previous legacy equipment. And how do we sustain that? How do we do that? And more importantly, they're asking the question, how does the Army fund that? So remember I said from the beginning, we're not getting any more money or any more resources. So what they're looking at is we need to divest of legacy C2 equipment to fund the new network. Some of you work in that space, both hardware and software. How do we get ahead of that? How do we stay lockstep with Army Futures Command so that as they prototype Next Gen C2, as they're doing right now in Project Convergence Capstone 5, and then next year they're doing that in Capstone 6, they're actually going to prove out that actual equipment with 4th ID. How do we see CECOM? How do we stay at the table and provide adaptive solutions to be able to maybe sustain some of those things that might not mean what we mean it today in terms of sustainment of Next Gen C2. How do we think about that? How do we transform moving down? Moving down to the organic industrial base, organic UAS. This is an initiative started by General Mohan, who's been adamant to us about we need to change the way we do things. And so General Mohan, he had a conversation with General George, Chief of Staff of the Army. And the question was, could AMC provide an organic UAS through advanced manufacturing or through the OIB? How do we leverage the depots to do that and to provide maybe a training solution for the Army like at NTC? And so AMC is looking at this right now with Rock Island and with Toby Hanna. And right now, this is actually where we're postured in a great space because of CECOM and Toby Hanna of looking out years ago. And so in June, they're having a ribbon cutting ceremony for a brand new microelectronics capability for the Army. And so what does that look like? It might look like AMC is producing and maybe developing things at a large scale for UAS for our soldiers to train. Kind of going into the third one, this really rolls all of these things up in what we're calling right now an adaptive sustainment framework that the command has been working on for about a year or so, of changing and evolving those sustainment and maintenance capabilities and some of the processes that go along with that that might need to change now that maybe we're doing now that might not be what we do moving forward. And so all of us in some case we've been living in that space. And so if the Army isn't really going to be sustaining things traditionally as we know it, why would we continue to be doing the same things? And really the best example up there, if you look at that, is Next Gen C2. They're willing to divest of legacy equipment now to take equipment out of soldiers' hands, and what that means is to possibly have a gap of those soldiers not having specific command and control equipment so that the Army can use that to enable the future C2 network. So these are some of the type of risk areas and the type of decision space and really the type of budget space that we're in across the Army. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is really how do we take that prudent risk and really get after what that number 4 is up there on the slide, is how do we solve problems for the Army? We're not really solving, if we're not solving a problem for the Army right now, then we need to look at why we're doing what we're doing and why we're doing it. And so I've talked a lot about network stuff, and obviously people in this command know we don't just do network things. We have a lot of people here that do a lot of different things in the network, but in other domains and capabilities across the Army. And so just because you don't see your area up on that slide doesn't mean there's not something for you in your space that is going on right now that you could change, or is maybe changing right now, or that you need to transform about how you're doing your job or getting after things in your organization. And so now we're really getting into this solution frame, the third frame. I framed the environment, I framed the problem for you, and now getting into the solution frame of how do we provide solutions to the Army. And so if we're not providing a solution for the Army, we need to look at why we're doing it. And so as we move forward, I'm just going to close with a couple quotes from senior leaders of the Army. Now, this first one is from the Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major Weimer. He said this after a recent exercise. He said, "If you're going to change, you have to experiment. And when you experiment, you're going to fail. And when you fail, you will learn." So how do we adopt to that model of experimentation within CECOM? Normally, we're very risk averse across our sustainment enterprise. And I think General George said it best here. And this is where all of you come into play. He said, all of us, every leader, business executive, policymaker, ally and partner, soldier, family, and friend must have the same sense of urgency about transforming our Army to meet the needs of our nation. The good news is, I know we can do this together. We are serious about change. Talking about it is not enough. So as I close out here and painted this picture for you, we have solutions right here in this command. And we want to hear from you. And that's what my directorate's getting after, where the Army is transforming down to the lowest levels and working this from the bottom up. We had, just as an example, we had the rep from HQDAG 6 at that fireside chat say, we need organizations like CECOM to bring solutions to the table to help figure out this problem for the Army. And what that means for them, it might mean that CECOM might be doing somebody else's job for a little bit, and that's okay. So as we move forward and you go out there today and you're trying to soak this in, I encourage you all, if you want to learn more, reach out to me or my personnel that I highlighted on that slide. Our contact information is there. I'd also like to strongly encourage you to read an article series by General Rainey that was put out in the Military Review back in August. And that really laid that out in even better terms than I just did. And I think it will just help everybody understand the headspace of the Army right now. So I encourage you to look those up and to give them a read. So finally, again, I just really want to charge all of you with what we have to think about in that what we're doing today and how it provides value to the Army. Where can we take risk? Because really, at the end of the day, we used to say this in this command or put it on slides, everything we do at the end of the day is about the warfighter. And we're all here to do that. That's why we work for the Army. We love that we get that opportunity to support the soldier. And we can help figure that out together as we transform. But right now, we're in a unique window of opportunity where if we can really codify or get a unity of effort across the command or organizations, we can really make some great progress. So I want to thank you for your time today. And again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me moving forward.